Welcome back, everybody, to our studies in AQA A-Level Sociology. What I want to do in this video is move on to the next substantive topic that you need to be familiar with when thinking about A-Level Sociology, and this is the subject of crime and deviance. Specifically in this lesson, what we're going to do is explain the functionalist interpretations of crime, deviance, social order, and social control. And this involves an examination of the positive functions of crime, the adaptations to strain and strain theory, the idea of subculture and differential association. So, essentially, all of these ideas of social order and social control emphasizes the idea of maintaining stability in society when thinking about it from a functionalist perspective. According to functionalist theory, crime and deviance are not necessarily abnormal, they're not necessarily abnormalities within a social structure, but rather they serve as important functions of a functioning society. And I want to begin by thinking about the work of Emile Durkheim and his approaches to crime and deviance. So he is obviously one of the founding fathers of functionalist sociology, and his views on crime are pivotal in establishing the perspective that essentially crime and deviance have functional roles to play within a societal structure. One of the key principles that he elucidates in his work The Division of Labour in Society from 1893 is this idea of crime as inevitable, universal, and functional. So Durkheim argues that crime is a normal and inevitable part of all societies. Specifically, in that book, Division of Labour in Society, he argued that every society, no matter how integrated or how well regulated or how well policed, will experience some form of deviance and crime. The reason for this is because society cannot regulate fully the control of all behaviours and actions. The more control of behaviour and action that you essentially regulate, the more of a totalitarian 1984 style system you end up creating. So there's a certain degree of balance that has to be done between freedom and totalitarianism. Rather than viewing crime then as purely harmful, Durkheim emphasizes that crime can have positive functions and that these positive functions have the ability of benefiting society. Crime, for example, can promote social cohesion and solidarity, and it does so by drawing clear moral boundaries. For example, when a crime occurs, society reacts and they perform a collective response. And this collective response to those crimes reinforces social values and social norms. So if you saw a murder case that took place and it was a particularly brutal, horrific event, the public outrage following such a crime strengthens a collective belief in the sanctity of life and the immorality of murder and the immorality of taking one's life. In addition to this, deviance has the ability to promote social change. Acts of deviance can challenge existing norms and provoke reform in the law and within policy. So social movements such as advocating for civil rights or gender equality or abortion rights even, all have the beginning standpoint of being particularly deviant in terms of the way in which they question established societal norms. Take, for example, civil rights movements in various different parts of the world, such as the civil rights movement in the United States, things like the Montgomery bus boycott, or even the movement against apartheid and the AFD in South Africa. These are all movements that begin as criminalized conduct. It was a criminal act, according to the laws at the time, for Rosa Parks to have refused to have got up from a seat on the bus. But she did so in protest of equal rights and in protest in favour of the civil rights movement. And so beginning as a criminal act eventually leads to the establishment of reforming social norms. Deviance also can allow society to clarify and to reaffirm its norms and values. So when a crime occurs, let's say robbery or burglary, the public discussion that follows helps to define what is considered to be acceptable behaviour. This is more so the case when crimes don't necessarily have a clear-cut answer. Things like murder or theft or burglary are very much examples of crimes that just reinforce social norms and moral values. But there could be certain crimes that are a little bit more grey in terms of whether or not they were actually guilty or whether or not the conduct was particularly harmful. And the result is that people debate about this question, about whether or not this person should be charged, or whether or not this person was charged with the correct crime, or whether or not the correct sentence was handed down. All of these things are, of course, things that help us to make values clearer and more consistent. Durkheim also develops a concept known as anomie, or normlessness, to describe a state in which societal norms and values just break down. So this could be exemplified as when we see times of social upheaval or rapid change or revolution in certain sectors. An anomic society, we see that individuals may feel disconnected, or they may feel uncertain about their roles within society because the established norms and institutions are weakened. This leads to, by extension, higher levels of crime and deviance, as individuals will then struggle to find meaning and to find direction in their lives. For Durkheim, social order was maintained not only through formal social control mechanisms, so things like law enforcement, things like the police, things like the Crown Prosecution Service, but also through informal social controls. These are things like shared values and norms that are shared among social groups. Even in the absence of a direct control, such as the police or the state, people nevertheless internalize social expectations, and this helps them to maintain social stability. Expanding on the ideas of Emile Durkheim comes Robert K. Merton, and he developed something known as strain theory. This was in 1938, and his strain theory suggests that deviance occurs when there is a gap between culturally approved goals and the means that are available to achieve those goals. So, ultimately, Merton argues, specifically in relation to American society, and argues that American society emphasizes material success and individual achievement. This is often through career achievement and through the accrual of wealth. Think, for example, of the American dream, and think of some of the ideas of the Great Depression and some of the literature around that time. However, not everybody has equal access to the legitimate means to achieve these goals. So they don't necessarily have equal access to employment opportunities, education. This might be because of systemic gender inequality or systemic racial inequality. And so the gap then between what is emphasized and what is available creates a strain. And so this is where strain theory starts to develop. We start to see that the role of social structure in deviance creates a system of groups, essentially, a number of different groups within this society that all operate in different ways. So, for example, conformists and conformity. A conformist will accept both the societal goals and the means to achieve them. They follow the societal rules, and they are less likely, therefore, to engage in crime or deviant behavior. So they accept, for example, success, the American dream, and they do so through the means that is available to them that are not deviant, essentially. So education and hard work, and that leads them, hopefully for them at least, to achieving those goals. Innovators, by contrast, accept the societal goals, but they often reject or modify the means of achieving them. This can, in some circumstances, result in deviant behavior, such as crime or another illegal activity to achieve success. So, for example, a person might turn to drug dealing as an alternative of a conventional job, but other innovators might actually just find ways of improving the means, but through legal methods, and hence why they are successful in doing so. Ritualists will abandon the societal goals, but they would rigidly adhere to the means instead. So rather than conformists who adhere to both societal goals and the means, or innovators who adhere to the societal goals but reject the means, ritualists accept the means but abandon the societal goals. They may continue to work hard without the expectation of success, and they simply just go through the motions of the societal norms. You also then have two further categories. Retreatism, or retreatists, reject both the goals and the means, and they therefore start to withdraw from societal expectations. Drug addicts or vagrants who no longer pursue success through conventional routes are examples of retreatists who don't seem to accept either of those particular results. But you also have people who reject both the goals and the means, but do so through rebellious circumstances. And so instead of withdrawing from societal expectations, they will often just replace those expectations with their own values. And a lot of revolutionary movements are seen as exemplifying of these kind of rebellious concepts. And they are examples of this form of deviance where individuals seek to overthrow societal norms. So Merton's strain theory, then, helps to identify that people may adapt to the strain they experience in various different ways. So these adaptations can be seen as a response to an unequal society. Those who cannot achieve success, for example, through the legitimate means, whatever that success may look like. So, for example, noting the American dream and the idea of careers and wealth and sometimes even things like family and basic sort of nuclear family values, all these different kinds of things, they might then turn to deviant or criminal behavior. And so strain theory highlights how inequality within the structure of society can contribute to the deviance and to the growth in crime and criminal activity. Albert Cohen developed something known as subculture theory. This, again, builds on the work of Merton and Durkheim and introduces this in his book from 1955 titled Delinquent Boys. Here he argues that subcultures, in fact, develop when individuals or groups are unable to achieve societal goals in the conventional ways. So building a little bit on the work of Merton and a little bit on strain theory. And what this leads to is the formation of alternative value systems. So Cohen's central argument to this particular theory is that lower class boys often experience status frustration, this idea of status frustration. And this is because they cannot achieve success through the conventional channels, such as education. They are at a disadvantage compared to middle class children who often are better able to meet society's expectations. And so, in response to this frustration, the boys from these delinquent subcultures start to form such groups. These subcultures begin to reject mainstream values and instead try to create their own alternative values. These alternative values often are in stark contrast and in opposition to the norms and societal values that are established by the middle class. Cohen's analysis looks at delinquent subcultures and suggests that they may emphasize behavior that is deviant or antisocial, such as truancy or vandalism, and this is seen as a way to get respect and recognition among peers, as opposed to the other ways you can get respect and recognition, which is, of course, through academic achievement and through these different kinds of things. And so, really, within these subcultures, it is argued by Cohen that group dynamics plays a very significant role. These boys come together to create a sense of belonging and a sense of collective identity outside of the ordinary cultures and groups that are expected within society. They may engage in deviant behavior, such as theft or violence, and this is to potentially gain status or to feel validated in a society where they are otherwise marginalized or excluded from mainstream success. If they are essentially validated by deviant behavior, then this is a sense of feeling successful and a sense of feeling, understood and included inside a particular group, something that they did not experience in the sort of mainstream circumstances of success and values. And so where they may feel marginalized in the ordinary mainstream areas of success, they are able to feel included by the use of deviant or criminal behavior. Another functionalist theory comes from Edwin H. Sutherland. Sutherland develops the theory of differential association. This is in his work Principles of Criminology from 1939. The idea of differential association focuses on how individuals learn deviant behavior through their interactions with others. So, according to Sutherland, deviance is not biologically inherent in any way, nor is it a product of personal pathology, but it is instead learned through the interaction that are played with by others. So individuals will learn criminal behavior just as they would learn any other kind of social behavior. So when we think and we thought back to our previous lessons on functionalism and other basic sociological theories, we noted that behaviors can be learned through communication and through socialization. And the same kind of thing can be said about criminal behavior. It can be learned just through the same way, through communication and socialization with those who have deviant values. People are therefore more likely to engage in deviant behavior if they are to associate with others who encourage or who condone such behavior. The frequency, the duration, and the intensity of these associations are all factors which will essentially determine whether or not A, an individual will adopt a deviant behavior, and B, just at which time an individual adopts a behavior. So frequency, duration, intensity, if all these things are quite high, a person is very much likely to adopt a deviant behavior and likely to do so at an earlier age. And you can really understand this through a very basic example. If a teenager spends time with peers who are engaged in criminal activity, through the basic sociological mechanisms of communication and socialization, that child is more likely to also engage in and adopt similar behaviors. Sutherland argues that deviant behavior is learned through the acquisition of norms and values, specifically norms and values that differ from those who are part of the wider remit of society. A young person may learn that drug use is acceptable within their peer group, even if it is not acceptable among broader society, and so because it is acceptable within their peer group, they are more likely to engage in it as well. Sutherland's theory highlights the role of social networks when it comes to the shaping of deviance. It suggests that deviant behavior is not merely an individual choice, but is instead heavily influenced by the social context in which an individual is situated. So, a person who is surrounded by criminal peers, like the example of the teenager I've just illustrated, is more likely to accept and to adopt this criminal behavior, while somebody who is surrounded by law-abiding individuals are more likely to conform to the social norms that sees them abiding by the law. And again, this obviously is conforming to the mainstream social values. Finally then, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time briefly talking about social control theories. Social control theories are influenced by functionalism, and they essentially emphasize how society attempts to regulate behavior and to maintain social order. So the key assumption, as we apply it to crime and deviance, is that crime and deviance occurs when social controls are weak and absent. So, for example, Travis Hirschi's social bond theory from 1969 argues that people are less likely to engage in deviant behavior if there are strong bonds in society. And according to Hirschi, these bonds are composed of 4 specific elements. They are composed of bonds relating to attachments, so things like emotional ties to family, friends, and others. Commitment, specifically investment in conventional goals and activities. Involvement, participation in conventional activities, which leaves less time for deviance, and then finally belief, the acceptance of, in believing, social norms and laws. If anybody has weaker social bonds, they are more likely to engage in deviant behavior, as they have less to lose from breaking those rules. Finally then, control theorists argue that social order is maintained through these kinds of bonds. Now they might differ and differentiate on what these kinds of bonds look like, but Travis Hirsch's view is these four particular component elements. But ultimately, through formal and informal mechanisms of social control, such as law enforcement, education, family structure, etc., these bonds can be reinforced and maintained. Deviance then is seen as the result of weak or insufficient controls on individual behavior. So to just wrap up and to conclude this lesson, we can see that functionalist explanations of crime emphasizes that these phenomena, the ideas of crime and deviance, while seemingly disruptive, actually can potentially serve important functions in society. From Durkheim's positive functions of crime to Merton's strain theory and Sutherland's differential association, we can see that functionalists view deviance as an integral part of social life, one that can help define boundaries, promote social change, as well as to reinforce group cohesion. In the next lesson, what we're going to do is talk about Marxist and neo-Marxist explanations of crime, deviance, and social order in a similar sense to what we have just done here in relation to functionalism.